In this video, we are going to learn how to implement the concept of temporary attachment in ProModel. Just to refresh your mind, attachment help us to capture the scenarios where different entities come together at a specific location and they get processed together. And if those entities stay together for the rest of the process, we have permanent attachment. But if at some point we separate those entities again and these entities go through the rest of the process on their own separately, then we have temporary attachment. Let's go through one example and see how we can implement temporary attachment in ProModel. Please go to the folder for week 5 and open the shipping boxes model that we developed and in which we learned permanent attachment. Please open the shipping boxes model in which we learned permanent attachment in the folder for week 5. Please open that model. We are going to make some modification in that model, and through those modifications, we are going to learn how to implement temporary attachment. So what I want you guys to do is to save as this model in the same folder. At the end of the name, instead of permanent attachment, I want you guys to put temporary attachment. So we are going to make some modifications in this model, and we are going to learn the temporary attachment technique. Okay. How are we going to change this model? Everything is the same as what we have done so far. Monitors come in. They go to monitor queue. Empty boxes go to the box queue. They go to the packing queue. We put one monitor in the box. They go to inspect queue, inspector, shipping queue, and then so they go to the inspector, and then they go to the inspect queue and then inspector. However, here the inspector does not just send the full box to the shipping queue. What happens is that we have empty pallets on what we call a pallet queue. Okay, and then empty pallets are in the pallet queue. So inspectors, after the inspector is done, puts one full box on top of an empty pallet and then send the full pallet to the shipping queue and then to the shipping. And at shipping, we remove the full box from the pallet. We send it out, and then we send the empty pallet back to the pallet queue to bring another part. So just to repeat again, when the full box goes from inspect queue to inspector and finishes the inspection operation, the full box does not go to shipping queue directly. The inspector put the full box on top of an empty pallet. Empty pallets are in a pallet queue. Then a full pallet comes out and goes to the shipping queue and then to the shipping. At shipping, the guy removes the full box from the pallet, send the box out, and then the pallet comes back to pallet queue to bring another part. And one piece of information that we have is that we have one empty pallet in the facility. That's it. Now, tell me which part of this process reminds you or is similar of a temporary attachment.
When it gets moved on a pallet.
Tell me what are the two entities that come together at inspector, because if it's attachment, the first thing is that we want two different entities. What are those two different entities?
Full box and pallet.
Full box and empty pallet. Okay. What is the entity that is coming out of the inspection?
Full pallet.
Full pallet is the entity that is going to come out. Full pallet is the one that goes to the shipping queue and then to the shipping. And what happens at the shipping that qualifies this whole thing to be a temporary attachment?
It unattaches at the shipping?
We unattach, exactly. Then we send the full box out. We keep the pallets, which again becomes an empty pallet, and we send it back to the pallet queue. Okay, so the fact that two different entities in full box and empty palette comes together. They go through the process together. Ad inspector makes it qualified to be an attachment, different entities. And then these two different entities, which becomes now a full palette, they stay together for some time. They go to the shipping queue and then to the shipping. And then right there, we separate them again. And we send the full palette out, and the empty palette comes back to the palette queue to bring another part. So that's exactly the specification of a temporary attachment. Our location. I asked you guys to add one more queue. Which is palette queue. And make sure this queue is queue, okay? For entities, I'm going to, do we need to add any entity?
A
Yes.
palette.
Empty palette.
One is empty palette. Anything else?
Full palette.
Yeah, and then full palette will be another. Okay. For the arrival, what changes did you implement? Especially to capture this part of information that we have one empty palette in the system.
Just had one occurrence.
So what is the entity that is coming to the system, or do you want to identify here in the arrival?
It was an empty palette, goes to the palette queue. One quantity, but only one occurrence.
Wait. Empty palette goes to palette queue. Quantity is?
One.
One. When?
0.
From the start of simulation. What else?
It only occurs one time.
It happens only one time. Do I need to worry about frequency then? No, I don't need to worry about frequency because this happens only once. So that's how we can take care of scenarios where we have a piece of information like we have one pallet in the system, we have 3 pallets in the system, we have 2 conveyors in the system, and so forth. So if we define those pallets as entities, we can say that, okay, these entities go to their location wherever they are where we are going to hold them. And here we have one, for example, a pallet, so the quantity is each, and it happens only once. So one pallet is in the system from the start of the simulation, and that's it. And that pallet is going to be used in the system for whatever purpose it's going to be used. So that way I can take care of this whole statement that we have one pallet in the facility. That this one line in the arrival took care of that. What if I tell you we have 5 pallets in the system? How would you make changes to accommodate for that? I have 5 pallets in this facility.
Just change the quantity each to 5.
Should I change quantity each to 5 or occurrence to 5?
Occurrence, yeah.
Can you guys defend your answers? Quantity each people and occurrence people, can you defend your answer?
Well, quantity each to 5 is you just have 5 pallets coming in, and then that's it. They're not coming in at a certain frequency.
Okay, so with the quantity each, if I put quantity each 5, what does this mean? That means 5 empty pallets came to the system right at the start of the simulation, this is number of entities that come to the system at each arrival. So right at the start of the simulation, 5 entities came to the system, and this happened only once, and that's it. So right at the start of the simulation, I have 5 empty pallets in the system. Perfect. If I change quantity each to 1 and change occurrence to 5, what does this mean? That means these empty pallets come to the system one by one. This happens 5 times, 5 arrivals. Then if this happens in 5 separate arrivals, which is shown by number of occurrences, then I definitely have to specify the frequency as well. What is the inter-arrival time? If I have 5 different arrivals, then I have to tell the simulation what is my inter-arrival time. Otherwise, we get error, nothing would happen. So this will not take care of what we need, because I need 5 empty pallets in the system right at the start of the simulation. This will not give me that. This just means pallets come to the system one by one, and I will have 5 arrivals, and I still don't know what is even inter-arrival time. Okay, so make sure you guys are clear. So if I tell you that we need 5 empty pallets in the manufacturing facility, and you want to capture that in the simulation, then all you need to tell the simulation is that right at the start of the simulation, let 5 empty pallets to be in the system, bring them to the system, create them in the system, and that's it. It's not going to happen again, and these 5 empty pallets will be used in the rest of the simulation. So that is how I can take care of that part. Okay. Right now, I have assumed that I have only 1 empty pallet, so I just change the quantity each to 1. But if it's more than that for your system, you can always change the quantity each. You should not change the occurrence. Okay, guys? Let's go to processing then. So here for the processing, okay, still monitor queue goes to the table, and then box queue goes to the packing table. In packing table, we perform the packaging, and then a full box comes out. Full box goes to the inspect queue. From inspect queue, we go to the inspector. And right now at inspector, we are going to perform the operation. So I want you guys to first delete the last 2 lines of that you have in your processes. We are going to rewrite those and maybe change them a little. Delete also the last line, guys, for me. Delete the last line as well. Okay. So now I have 4 lines. So in the last line that I have, a full box has gone from inspect queue to inspector, right? Inspector is where the inspection happens. Then I put the full box on top of the empty pallet. So the temporary attachment happens at the inspector. But before I can perform the temporary attachment at the inspection, I also have to bring the other entity to the inspector as well, right? So right now, in the very last line that you have, full box goes from inspect queue to inspector. Okay, 1 entity got to the inspector, but I have to bring the other entity to the inspector as well. The other entity that I need to bring to the inspector to be able to perform that temporary attachment is empty pallet, right? Empty pallet, which is already at pallet queue, is going to go to inspector. Okay, so now at inspector, I have both entities that I need. The same thing that we did for the packaging table. I first brought the packaging, the monitor to the packaging table. Then I brought the box queue to the packaging table. Then I performed the join operation. The same happens. First, I bring the full box from inspect queue to the inspector. Then I need to bring the empty pallet from pallet queue to the inspector. Then I have to perform the temporary attachment operation. And that's what we did here. Now where are we? We are at inspector, okay? And we want to perform the inspection operation and the temporary attachment operation. Similar to the join, we have to first decide on which one of these 2 entities is going to be our base entity. Any one of the entities can be the base entities, but similar to the join, the base entity is the one that is going to initiate the whole command related to the temporary attachment. Okay, let's assume empty pallet is our base entity. Okay, so consider empty pallet to be the base entity. And where are we right now?
Inspector.
We are at inspector. Both entities that we have, full box and empty pallet, both of them are at inspector. That's where we are going to put them next together. So, and I assume among full box and empty palette, I let empty palette to be the base entity that is going to initiate the whole operation. And let's see what happens here. So add inspector, I'm going to write it in the operation window. First, I'm going to perform the inspection operation. And inspection operation, as we had it, is going to take normal distribution, average 4, standard deviation 2, right? First, I'm performing the inspection operation. And here I also we can write a comment if you want to, so that you know, okay, this is the inspection time. And to be able to write a comment, we put /*, then it turns, the color changes to green. Then I can say this is inspection time. And then to close the comment, you can again say */. Okay, so that's one way to write a comment. Okay, add inspector, the inspector first performs the inspection operation. After we are done with inspection operation, then we put the full box on top of an empty palette. This loading operation also is going to take some time. Let's assume that loading operation for putting the full box on top of empty palette has uniform distribution with average 3 and half width 1. So I'm going to put the wait time associated with that as well. Uniform distribution, average 3, standard deviation of 1. And this is going to be loading time, I'll call it. Okay, so that's going to be my load time. And then I'm going to write the comment that is load. The keyword for the temporary attachment is load. For permanent attachment, the keyword was join. For temporary attachment, the keyword is load. And I just need to say load 1. I don't need to say load 1 full box. I don't need to say that. I just need to say load 1. That's all I need to say. And for this to happen correctly, I also need to do something similar to the thing that we did for the join. I need to go to the line where the other entity gets to the inspector. My other entity here is full box. I need to go to the line where full box gets to the inspector, and I have to tell full box that if another entity started the load operation, be ready to be loaded. Okay, so I need to go to the other line where the other entity, which is full box, goes to the inspector. That's the 4th line, where full box goes from inspect queue to the inspector, you see. I have to go to that line, click on the rule, and then say if load requested, and press OK. And you see the rule changes to load. Okay, so now, then when this load operation, when the empty box, which is the base entity, starts load 1, then you don't get error. Then the load operation happens. One full box gets attached to one empty palette. Okay. Now, so then in add inspector, these are the things that we perform. Add inspector first, we perform the inspection operation. That's the first wait time. Then we put one full box on top of the palette. Here, the loading time takes time. And let's assume this is the amount of time, uniformly distributed, the average 3 and half width 1. If your loading time does not take any time, that's fine. Do not put any wait operation, just you need to put the load. That's perfectly fine. You'll still do the load, but it doesn't take time in your example, if that's the case. If loading takes time, put the time that the loading will take. Okay, so what is the entity that is coming out?
Full palette.
Is going to be full palette, and full palette is going to go shipping queue. And then full palette from shipping queue goes to shipping. And then what happens at shipping? Full pallet, which is the entity at shipping. So what happens here? What do you expect to happen here?
It's unloaded.
Yes,
Separate them.
exactly. We need to unload the full box from the pallet. So here, I'm going to write the operation here in the operation window. So first, I have to take care of the unload operation. And let's assume the unload operation also takes uniform distribution with average 3 and half with 1. Okay, and also put down that this is the unload time. Before I can perform any shipping, I have to first do the unload, right? Unless I unload the full box from the pallet, I cannot send it out. I cannot do any shipping. So first I have to perform the unload operation. So this is unload time. Okay. And then the command that takes care of the unload is unload 1. Okay, again, I don't need to say unload 1 full box. I just need to say unload 1 and it would unload or separate the other entity automatically. Okay, now when we perform the unload, then now again we have 2 entities in our hand. Suddenly the full pallet, which is 1 entity, becomes, after unload, becomes full box and empty pallet. On the destination, always put the base entity. Here, the base entity was empty pallet, right? So on the entity that is coming out on the destination side, after we perform the unload, always put the base entity. So base entity here was empty pallet. So after we perform the unload on the destination side, empty pallet comes out. Where does the empty pallet go?
Back in the queue, pallet queue.
Back to the pallet queue. Okay, that takes care of that. And then here on another line, take care of the other entity. What is my other entity?
Your full box.
It's the full box. Where is it here? And where is it right now?
Shipping.
It's at shipping. That's where we did the whole unload, right? We got to the shipping, but we couldn't send it out right away. We had to do the unload. We did the unload. The empty box is back to the pallet. The empty pallet is back to the pallet queue, but still the full box is still sitting at the shipping. So then I need to send the full box from shipping to exit. And this task, the whole shipping process, takes some time as before, and that's uniform 5.1. Okay, make sure to save, guys, as we proceed. What did we do here, guys? Just to go over it one more time. We finished everything all the way to the point that the full box went from inspect queue to inspector, right? Similar to what happens to the join, where we have to first bring both entities to that location, then start the join. We have to do the same for the load, which is temporary batching. I have to first bring both entities to that location, which is inspector, then start doing whatever I need to do to bring those 2 entities together. So I brought the full box from inspector to inspect queue, to inspector, from inspect queue to inspector. But before I can do anything at inspector, I have to also bring the empty pallet from pallet queue to the inspector. That's what we added in line find. I brought the empty pallet from pallet queue to inspector. Now add inspector. That's where we have to put 1 full box on top of an empty pallet. Also, we have to perform the inspection operation or whatever else we need to do at that place. So then, similar to the join, first I have to decide on which one of these entities is going to be my base entity. Base entity is the one that is going to always initiate the join command or load command. So any one of the entities can be the base entity. I assume that empty palette is going to be my base entity. So then empty palette add inspector. Add inspector, both of them in both empty palette and full box, both of them are add inspector. Now I assume empty palette add inspector is the one that is going to initiate the whole thing. That's my base entity. So what is the first thing that I need to happen at inspector? I want the inspection operation first happens. I want to take care of the inspection operation first. And that's why I put the first wait time here. Okay. After the inspection operation is done, then I need to put one full box on top of an empty palette. And for that, I need the load command. Okay. If that load operation also takes time, first put the wait time of that load operation, then put the load command. If your loading operation does not take any time, no worries. Do not put any wait time. Just put the load one command. For the join, I needed to say join one monitor, for example. For the load, I do not say anything, load one full box or anything like that. Just say load one. And then what is coming out is full palette. The new entity is the one that is coming out and go to its own destination. However, for this line to work properly, I need also to tell the other entity who gets to the inspector to be ready to be loaded if some other entity started the load command. So my other entity that is at inspector is the full box. So I have to go to the line where that brings the full box to the same location, and that's this one. Brings the full box from inspect queue to the same location to the inspector. And over there, I have to make sure to check if load requested. That way, full box is ready to be loaded if another entity initiates the load command add inspector. If we forget to do that, we get error. Full palette is coming out, goes to ship queue. From ship queue, it goes to shipping. And what happens at shipping? At shipping, before I can perform the shipping operation, I have to unload the full box from the pallet, from the full pallet. And so first, I have to take care of the unload. The command for the unload is just unload one, okay? If your unload operation takes time, first put the wait that captured that processing time, that unload time. If your unload operation does not take any time, no worries, don't put anything for the wait, just put the unload one, okay? That's perfectly fine. When we do the unload, now again, I have two separate entities in my hand, full box and empty palette. For the destination of the line where we write the command for the unload, always send the base entity out. Here, my base entity is empty palette. So I'm going to send the empty palette back to palette queue to bring another full box, and then write another separate line for what is going to happen to your other entity. So my other entity here is full box, is at the shipping, and right here, the shipping operation is going to happen, which is uniformly distributed 5-1, and then that full box is going to leave the system. Okay. I want you guys to pay attention. Remember here for the join, for group or ungroup, for combine, and for the join, always we put the command join or combine or group and everything, and then we put the wait, right? For the load, it's just different. We put the wait time first, and then we write load one or unload one. And it's not a big deal. That's just how things have been coded in the behind the scene in ProModel. Just learn this. There is nothing to think about. Just learn that for everything else, first I put the command, if it's combine, if it's join, if it's group or whatever, then write down the wait time associated with performing the operation. But if it comes to load and unload, you put the wait time first, and then you write load one or unload one or things like that. Just keep that in mind. And also I want you guys to pay attention that similar to what we had for the join, for the load, I didn't need to increase the capacity of the inspector. So at inspection, I get one full box and one empty palette, and I put one full box on top of empty palette, but I didn't increase the capacity of the inspector to 2. You can keep it as 1, similar to what we did for the packaging table where I did not increase the capacity. So for batchings, we always need to change the capacity of the locations to be at least equal to the number of similar entities that come together in that location for batching. For attachments, no matter if they are temporary attachments or permanent attachments, we do not need to change the capacity of the locations. We can keep them as one. Keep that in mind as well. We are going to run this for 100 hours again.
Professor, you forgot to put decrease work in process.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yes, guys. In the very last line, if you want to calculate the working process correctly, in the very last line, when we send the full box out after the shipping operation is done, make sure to decrease the working process one more time and make sure to increase what was the variable name? Make sure to increase the variable that counts how many monitors should left the system finally. Since we deleted the last line, that part of the change in variables was deleted as well. So please put them back in your last line. Decrease the working process variable and increase the variable that counts how many monitors were shipped from the system. Okay, guys. So at the end, I had 409 full box that left the system and about 400. And let me see. One more thing I wanted to mention here is that for the comments, guys, there's another way to write down comments. It's like // and then you can write whatever you want. This is comment. And then if you go to the next line, so for example, so you see here I put // then I wrote something as comment. I don't need to close it necessarily. When I go to the next line, if I write something, it's again blue. It's considered as a new line, new comment and everything. So if I write a wait line here or write anything, simulation will treat it as code. But if I write this as opposed to // I say as /*, then you see everything is now green. It's considered as a comment till I close that comment. And it just considered this little */ that I put here as if I closed that comment. Okay, so that's everything is considered as comment unless it finds another // to close it. So just be careful about that. Sometimes it may confuse you. There are two ways to write comments. // everything after that is comment, just in that line. If you go to the next line, everything again is treated as a line of code. You don't need to close that comment. But if you put if you put /*, then you have to close the comment by putting another // okay? Just be careful about how you write your comments. Both of them are fine. Just pick anyone that works for you. Just be careful about how to write.